I am taping this in my living room in California, and I so wish that I could have been with you in person at this exciting meeting. But since I can, it just wasn't possible for me to be there. I'm very happy that I can be with you through this video electronically. I want to say, first of all, that I am delighted that the paper that I wrote, and that was read by some of you, on a new economics has been so well received, and that many of you are finding it useful. And of course you can all read it, and I hope you will, because what it does, it is really offers a context, a larger context for our work. And I'll just touch on a couple of things here. If we really here at the World Future Council, we have been, and very properly so, been focusing very much on the environment, and particularly on global warming. But global warming, the environment, these, are only symptoms, really, of underlying dysfunctions. Dysfunctions that are inherent in what my research over the last 4 decades has identified as the configuration of domination systems. And part of domination systems are economic systems that are, by their very nature, uncaring. They have to be, because they maintain top-down rankings. Neoliberalism, to a large extent, was, of course, a return, a regression to dominator economics, where there was a lot of talk about freedom, but what it really meant was freedom for those on top to do what they wanted without, quote, regulation by the government. And the trickle-down economics, the idea was for those on bottom to content themselves with the scraps from the opulent tables of those on top. And this isn't a question of capitalism. This is a question of dominator economics, whether it's feudal or mercantile, or yes, even whether it was communist economics in the former Soviet Union, as those of us who visited and were so lavishly entertained glimpsed. Now, what we need is what really Einstein said. We can't solve problems with the same thinking that created them. So the work that I've been doing, the research that I've been doing, basically proposes that the old categories of right-left, religious, secular, east-west, north-south, that these are basically useless at this point because none of them look at the whole system. And let me give you some examples of what tremendously fundamental areas they leave out. And I'll get back now to the issue of global warming, because I will give you some examples of my proposed talk, my planned talk. I will be speaking at the United Nations at a meeting in preparation for the Copenhagen conference on climate. I'll be speaking on September 16. And my topic there is the real wealth of nations, from global warming to global partnership. And the partnership system, of course, is the other side of this continuum from a domination to a partnership system. And it does not mean a flat organization. There are hierarchies. It doesn't mean cooperation only. People cooperate in domination systems. Monopolies cooperate. Terrorists cooperate. Invading armies cooperate. It's a configuration. And I don't want to take the time to talk about it, because I really want to focus now on one aspect of that configuration that has to be considered. It's really like the elephant in the room. As I will be pointing out in my UN talk, there's no question, there's hardly any question now that there will be catastrophes because of global warming, and that part of our job is amelioration and mitigation. And in doing this, we really have to have a realistic picture. We have to broaden our lens. So I'm going to give you some statistics that some of you may not know about. In Bangladesh, a study recently showed that during one of their natural catastrophes, 90%, 90%, of those who drowned were female. Now that's a huge statistic. But it's not isolated. In many world regions, women and children disproportionately are the most vulnerable. And this is not only, like in Southeast Asia, for example, that women aren't taught how to swim. You know, it's not part of their women's role to be independent, but even beyond that, that the culture, including the cultural beliefs they themselves carry in their heads, prohibit them from leaving their home without a male relative being with them. So yes, during one of these flash floods, many of these women, they stayed and they died. That was not necessary. So when we really deal now with funding, and we can have an influence on this, let's make sure that the money doesn't just go to some bureaucracy, but that it goes to some of the NGOs that are working to train women. I mean, where women are brought into the disaster response training, there are hardly any fatalities. That's another study. Well, because, you know, the children are so dependent on them, of course, too. So we're talking women, children, not only the poor. Yes, the poor are the most vulnerable, but consider something else. Women in this world are 70%, 70% of those living in absolute poverty, and that's starvation or near starvation. That doesn't mean that men in domination systems aren't poor. Of course they are. But you know, they have to be. I mean, that's a system where poverty is part of the equation. But as John Lennon said, he said women are still the niggers of the world. So this is an elephant in the room, and people are uncomfortable talking about gender, but it's up to leaders such as us to really broaden the conversation so we can talk about these issues. And they affect everything. We're talking about crimes against future generations. Think about the issue of armaments, of nuclear weapons, of violence as a means of resolving conflict. Study after study and my own research indicates something, well, something that once you say it out loud, it seems perfectly self-evident. If you don't address traditions of intimate violence, that's right, violence against women and children in families that are, again, inherent in domination systems, whether they're Eastern or Western, whether it was Hitler's Germany or Stalin's Soviet Union, whether it was, you know, the Taliban. I mean, the European Middle Ages really looked a lot like the Taliban. If you think about it, the Inquisition, the Crusades, the witch burnings, you know, whether you publicly burn a woman to death or publicly torture her to death by stoning, it's the same. It's exemplary public violence against a socially subordinated group. And that group happens to be the half of humanity that gives birth, that takes care of children, that every man is born from as well. And if you can't really trust, if you have to control that person, how can you have a system of trust? It's a mess, isn't it? But let's get back to intimate violence. Study after study shows, of course, that if you have traditions of violence against women and children, children learn a very important lesson in families. They learn that it's okay, that it's even moral to use violence to impose your will on others. So let's really start at the grassroots here. Let's have a real systems approach. There are many examples that I can give you here of what a real systems approach means. It means taking into account the whole of humanity, including its female half. It means looking at creating an economic system that no longer devalues that stereotypical, quote, feminine work of caring and caregiving. A system that I call a caring economics that gives adequate value and, yes, visibility to the most important work, the work of caring for people starting in early childhood and the work of caring for our Mother Earth. Then we have foundations on which to build, but we need to build those foundations. So I want to be useful, I want to be of service, and I thank you. I hope that these ideas spark some of your own ideas and creativity, and I miss you, I miss being with you, And I look forward to seeing you, I hope, in Hamburg next year.